Hi everyone, it's Ren here. I hope you are well today, guys. Before I start talking about this difficult subject that we have today, which is nonetheless very important, how INFJs can deal with toxic people, let them go, cut them loose, just to remind you that I have written a book. It's all the way here, and it's the deepest investigation of the INFJ that you'll ever find. So if you're willing to spend a bit less than $10 on an ebook or a paperback, the Ecstatic Soul is the way to go. All the available links are in the description box below. You increase your knowledge, you support me. It's a win-win scenario. Okay, so what can we say about how INFJs relate to toxic people, people who exhibit certain patterns that are unhealthy and that drain you, people who make you feel terrible about yourself, people who try to make you dependent on them, and so on and so forth. First observation. There's a lot that's said about the INFJ door slam. The INFJ door slam is something that people talk about all the time. And to be honest, there is a reason why it's talked about. The INFJ door slam is a real thing. It's a real phenomenon. However, and I made videos on the topic, which I will link below, but what distinguishes the INFJ door slam is not how often it happens, but the peculiar nature of how it happens, the way in which it is unexpected, seems final, without warning, can leave the people who are the victims of this door slam to feel like they are suddenly excluded without having had the chance to explain themselves. So there can be something that is experienced as damaging for the person who is door slammed. But that doesn't mean that the INFJ door slam happens particularly often. That's not what distinguishes it. And in fact, my point is, based on my experience looking at INFJs over the years, many different INFJs, friends, acquaintances, and so on, I can safely say that the door slam, if anything, doesn't happen nearly enough. It should happen way more often, because INFJs have a tendency to attract people that are going to want to take advantage of them, of either of their kindness or of their tolerance, of their openness, of their willingness to provide advice. There's a certain something about the NIFE combination that seems to attract toxic people of all sorts, because they can sense that they will get away with it. And in a sense, the INFJ door slam is such a conundrum and is difficult to understand for other people, precisely because it's a real last resort for INFJs. And once they decide to go for the door slam, there's a sense in which they're not capable of doing anything else. That's the last thing they can do in relation to that particular person. To try to engage anymore would drain them of what's little left of their energy in them. So this is something that they just can't do anymore. So they door slam once and for all. But first, let's remember that victims of the door slam usually deserve the door slam. This is something also that is not clear or clarified enough. Sometimes there is this sense, the myth of the door slam, as if it was like this INFJ power that can sometimes be meted, unfairly or arbitrarily. This is very rarely the case. Of course, there can be situations in which someone is door slammed and they can legitimately wonder why that happens. Not all INFJs are healthy, let's keep this in mind, but at the same time, usually if the INFJ is healthy and has a fairly good sense of what's going on, and INFJs are keenly observant through an INFE, and TI rationalizes these observations and makes sense of them in the INFJ mind. So INFJs usually know what they're doing, and if they're door slamming, it's that there's a need to door slam. So I would say in the vast majority of cases, it's good that the INFJ door slams. In a sense, if they could have done it earlier, it would have been better. Not for the other person, because if the other person is toxic, we don't want to focus too much on them, but for the INFJ themselves, because the door slam is not something that is made by a person who's in a good state of mind. It's not like the INFJ just presses a button. I will now door slam this person. It's a painful process for them as well. And, door slam is really a last resort. But like I said, there are going to be so many situations where any INFJ is going to be dealing with a toxic person, and They will not cut them out of their life. They will not cut them out of their social circles. They will not cut, they will just not manage to get rid of them. And that's what I'm interested in, to try to dig into what are the causes of this inability to push people out, establish clear boundaries and just let them go and not think about them anymore. Why do INFJs not manage to do that often enough? And how can that be addressed? How can INFJs shift their perspective to be able to do that more often? And possibly prior to it becoming an actual door slamming, which, as I said, is an act of last resort where the INFJ is already probably psychologically damaged to an extent, otherwise they would have resorted to something else. Before I move to that explanation and suggestions of possible options, just remember something. If you have ever experienced toxic people in your life, this is not an indication that you're yourself toxic or that you deserve it, or that you are a walking victim or whatever, you know. Unfortunately, toxic people exist. They're everywhere. You know, you're fortunate if you don't have too many to deal with in your lifetime, but they exist. And in fact, insofar as you're someone who has friends, let's say you're friends, online, offline, online friends, great. Offline friends, fundamental, more important for your balance. You know, I emphasize this often, but just to keep in mind that if you're someone who has friends, you're someone who at some point is going to be sorely disappointed, sorely betrayed, or manipulated, or, you know, the target of a narcissist of some kind. It's going to happen. It's a function of the fact that, you know, if you have friends at some point, or acquaintances, if you're someone who's socially open, you're exposing yourself to the risk. And in a sense, it's much more important to be socially open than not to be in the anticipation that someone could be toxic. You know, there's nothing worse than staying secluded and on your own. So, you know, dealing with toxic people can happen to anyone insofar as they're people who have friends and allow themselves to be social, which is a fundamental feature of being a human. Problem with INFJs is, I think, is that they do not have at the functional level, so in terms of the cognitive function stack, they do not have a very solid apparatus for justifying to themselves getting rid of someone, which means that they will tend to feel guilty if they proceed. And the guilt usually leads them to second guess themselves and then give the person another chance. That's a factor of also being an introvert, because as an introvert, they have this tendency, and I think that this is one of the things that INFJs have to be careful about. It's to not keep everything to themselves, not think that they can deal with everything independently, that they want to have this independence and not be a weight upon others. When you're facing someone that you want to cut out or that you cut out, don't stay alone with this decision. You can share that with your friends, and by having a conversation with them, you'll be able to externalize some of these feelings and this justification process. And surprise, surprise, your friends will tell you, if they're not crazy and they're really your friends, that you're right to cut them loose. And you'll get that justification that you need, because FE users tend to need that, especially FE auxiliary losers. Terrible freudian slip. FE auxiliary users. Because FE dominant ENFJs, you know, it's harder for INFJs to cut people out than it is for NTJs, for example, again, because FE is a function that depends on the opinion of the tribe. And so it's hard to make a decision without having some sort of outside confirmation, which exposes you, if you don't consult people, to consult the person that you door slammed. Of course, that person is going to want to come back in your life, and you let them come back if they are the ones you consult. So ENFJ is same, but because FE is dominant, they're still able to muster a justification at the kind of impersonal societal level to rest tranquil in the idea that they were right about cutting someone loose. INFJs, they're not FE dominance, they're NI dominance, very introspective. If they do not talk to other friends about what they decided to do, just to be able to externalize that decision and count also on their friends to support them in that decision. If they do not do that, if they keep to themselves, maybe there is a sense of guilt precisely because they're afraid they made a mistake. It's very important that they surpass that sense of guilt and share with their friends, not allow the self-doubt to fester by not engaging the FE function at that level. If they manage to do that, they'll be able to deal with letting people go, cutting toxic people loose much more easily. So talk to your friends, make use of your FE function. See you guys. Consider subscribing and enjoy the rest of your week.